The luxury store stood on the corner of a bustling city street, its glass windows reflecting the late afternoon sunlight. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive leather and polished wood. The store's decor was nothing short of extravagant. Sleek marble floors gleamed under soft golden lights that created an almost ethereal glow. The shelves were lined with high-end designer clothing, sparkling jewelry, and the latest in cutting-edge technology. Everything was pristine, every product perfectly placed, as if it was waiting to be admired by someone who could truly appreciate its value. From the moment you entered, you could feel the exclusivity of the place. The atmosphere wasn't just luxurious, it was intimidating. There was an air of superiority, a silent message that this was a store for the rich, the influential, the elite. It wasn't a place for casual shoppers. It was a place where only the chosen few could afford to indulge in the finest things in life. The soft hum of ambient music filled the background, further adding to the sense of sophistication. Sales associates, dressed in sharp black suits, moved gracefully between the aisles, offering knowing smiles to those who walked through the doors. They spoke in hushed tones, as if every conversation was meant to remain discreet. And then Michael stepped in. Michael walked into the store with purpose. His stride was steady, his presence calm, but his demeanor was that of someone who knew exactly what they wanted. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored suit, nothing too flashy, but certainly respectable. His black suit fit him well, tailored to perfection. The shirt he wore beneath was crisp, and his polished shoes reflected the light of the store. Yet, despite his well-maintained appearance, there was nothing about him that screamed wealth. Unlike many of the other customers in the store who wore their designer labels like a badge of honor, Michael's clothes spoke of subtlety. His look was one of quiet confidence, not of excess. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply there to shop. Michael didn't need to say anything for the store employees to take notice. His mere presence was enough to make them raise an eyebrow. The moment he entered, the staff's attitude shifted. They exchanged quick, almost imperceptible glances, and the shift in energy was palpable. It was as if they all simultaneously decided that Michael didn't belong here, that he wasn't someone who could afford to shop at their exclusive boutique. The manager, Mr. Roberts, stood behind the counter, observing Michael with an expression that was barely concealed, yet unmistakably dismissive. Mr. Roberts' gaze swept over Michael as if scanning him from head to toe, his eyes lingering for just a second longer than necessary. His expression was cold, businesslike, but there was an undeniable look of judgment behind his eyes. The manager didn't need to say a word. His body language alone told Michael that he was an outsider. He wasn't one of them. Michael was just another customer, another potential shopper. But to Mr. Roberts, he was someone who didn't fit the picture of the wealthy clientele this store catered to. The staff around Michael couldn't hide their whispers, though they tried. As he moved deeper into the store, they began to murmur among themselves, eyes glancing his way every now and then. They spoke in hushed tones, their voices low but sharp, just loud enough for him to catch a few words here and there. Words like, "Does he even belong here?" and "I don't think he can afford any of this," floated in the air, carried on the subtle vibrations of their judgment. The assumption was clear. A black man, well-dressed, but not flashy, couldn't possibly be a customer they needed to cater to. His clothes weren't branded, his shoes weren't shining with the same expensive polish, and he certainly didn't look like someone who could walk out with a multi-thousand-dollar purchase. He was out of place. It wasn't long before one of the sales associates approached Michael, a young woman who wore a perfectly tailored black uniform. Her smile was tight, almost forced. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her tone polite but not exactly warm. Michael nodded, his voice steady as he answered. "I'm looking for a gift for my mother. Something special, elegant." The associate's eyes flickered for a moment, scanning him once more. "Of course, sir. We have a variety of luxury items to choose from." She led him towards a display of expensive watches. Michael smiled politely, though he could feel her discomfort. He gestured toward a few of the items, asking about their prices and features, but the way she responded made it clear she wasn't really trying to help him. Instead, she seemed more interested in making sure he didn't touch anything that might be too much for him. She handed him one watch, her voice a little too sweet as she said, "This one is quite exquisite, but perhaps more suited for someone like you." Her comment was subtle, but Michael heard it loud and clear. She wasn't talking about the watch. She was talking about him. As Michael moved deeper into the store, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. The soft hum of ambient music that had once seemed so pleasant now felt more like a background noise to the growing discomfort he was feeling. Every step he took seemed to draw more attention, though not the kind he wanted. The store employees, who had initially sized him up and dismissed him, were now making their assumptions clearer with their actions. It started with the way the manager, Mr. Roberts, followed him from a distance. The man was supposed to be overseeing the store, ensuring everything was in order, but instead he seemed fixated on Michael. Every time Michael turned around, he could feel Mr. Roberts's eyes on him, scanning him with a judgmental gaze. It wasn't subtle. It was a kind of surveillance that made Michael's skin crawl. Soon Michael realized he wasn't the only one who had taken notice of his presence. As he browsed through the aisles one by one, the sales staff began to gather near him. They weren't helping him, not in the way you would expect in a high-end store. Instead, they hovered around him, standing just a little too close, as if waiting for him to make a wrong move. Every time he picked up an item to examine, the staff would subtly shift their positions, as if making sure he didn't damage anything. When he placed the item back, they would glance at each other, exchanging silent, knowing looks. Michael noticed that when they spoke to him, their voices were overly sweet, but with a distinct undercurrent of condescension. "That's a lovely piece, sir," one of the associates commented, her voice too chipper, almost mocking. "But it's quite an investment, you know. Are you sure you want to spend that much?" She said this with a laugh, though Michael could tell it wasn't meant to be funny. It was an insinuation, an insult dressed in the form of politeness. His discomfort grew with each passing moment. The manager, Mr. Roberts, had now positioned himself nearby, as if to make sure Michael didn't wander too far into the expensive sections of the store. His presence was subtle but firm, like an unspoken signal to the other staff members to keep an eye on this unexpected customer. Michael didn't engage. He remained quiet, focusing on what he had come here to do, buy a gift for his mother. He picked up a few items, nodded when asked if he needed assistance, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the staff was watching him, as if waiting for him to mess up. There was an uncomfortable tension in the air. No one was offering him help in the way they would offer a rich customer. Instead, they followed him around like he might be there to cause trouble. It wasn't long before the whispers started. As Michael moved to the next aisle, he heard the faintest sound of giggles. At first he thought it was just the usual chatter of customers in a store, but then he realized it was the staff. He caught the tail end of a conversation between two associates standing nearby. "I don't know why he's even here," one of them said, in a voice loud enough for Michael to hear, but soft enough that it didn't immediately draw attention. "Does he think he can afford any of this?" Michael's breath caught in his throat, but he said nothing. He kept his head down, pretending to be focused on the items in front of him. He could feel the heat rise in his chest, but he fought to control his emotions. This was nothing new. He had faced worse in his life, but somehow this felt more personal, more calculated. The second associate laughed softly. "Yeah, I bet he's just here to look, like all the others. Another guy who thinks he can fit in at a luxury store. He'll be gone in a few minutes." Michael's grip on the item in his hand tightened, but he still didn't say a word. He didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing his anger. He knew that's exactly what they were hoping for, some sort of outburst that would give them the excuse to escort him out of the store. Instead, he continued to browse, his heart beating faster in his chest. As he walked further into the store, Michael's eyes wandered to the other side, where he noticed the manager, Mr. Roberts, talking to another associate. The conversation was low, but he could catch snippets of it. "Keep an eye on him," Mr. Roberts said, glancing in Michael's direction. "He's probably just here to waste time. Don't offer him anything too good, okay? He doesn't belong in our store." The words stung, and Michael felt a flash of heat rise in his face. He wasn't sure if it was anger or humiliation or both, but the feeling was sharp. He wanted to speak up, to confront them, but he held back. It was one thing to be judged for his appearance, but another thing entirely to be dismissed as a person. The manager's tone wasn't just condescending, it was cruel. By now, Michael had heard enough. He could feel his chest tighten as the staff's mocking behavior escalated. The whispers grew louder, more frequent, and their judgment more evident. Every time he picked up an item, it felt like the entire store was watching. The sales associates continued to move around him, offering no real assistance, but instead making sure he didn't linger too long in any particular section. They followed him from one corner of the store to another, making it impossible to feel comfortable or welcome. At one point, Michael overheard the manager speaking to another employee near the high-end watches section. "Look at him," Mr. Roberts muttered, his voice dripping with disdain. "He's just another guy who thinks he's good enough to be here. Probably wants to buy a $20,000 watch with his paycheck from some small-time job. It's pathetic." It was clear to Michael that the staff didn't see him as a customer. To them, he was a joke, a fool who had dared to enter their world and thought he could belong. But Michael wasn't here to make a scene. He wasn't here to argue or fight. He was here for one reason: to buy a gift for his mother. So he kept walking, moving slowly through the aisles, his heart heavy with the weight of their words. He didn't confront anyone, didn't show any sign of the storm brewing inside him. Instead, he chose to remain silent, taking note of every comment, every insult. He would let them see that he was not the person they assumed him to be. Michael stood still for a moment, staring at the expensive merchandise before him. The voices of the sales associates, the manager's dismissive gaze, and the mocking whispers filled the air, drowning out the elegance of the store and replacing it with a suffocating feeling of alienation. It wasn't the first time he'd been treated this way, but somehow this moment felt different. It felt more personal, more insidious. Every time he reached for something, they watched him like a hawk, and when he walked past them, they whispered behind his back, not bothering to hide their judgment. He could hear one of the sales associates giggling as he reached for a pair of high-end sunglasses on a nearby shelf. "Look at him," she whispered to her colleague. "Does he even know how much those cost?" He didn't need to hear the rest of the conversation. He already knew what they were thinking, what they were saying. It was the same story. A black man, poorly dressed by their standards, trying to fit in with people who were deemed worthy of luxury. He wasn't the first, and certainly wouldn't be the last, but today it stung more than it ever had before. It felt like a slap in the face. Each word they spoke was a reminder that to them he didn't belong. Michael had walked into this store with hope. He was here for his mother, hoping to find something special for her, a small token of his appreciation for everything she had done for him. But now, as the minutes ticked by, all he felt was the sting of rejection. The staff wasn't interested in helping him. They were only interested in his wallet. They had already written him off as someone who couldn't afford anything in the store. To them, he wasn't a customer. He was just a nuisance. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. The words they had spoken echoed in his head, replaying over and over again. He doesn't belong here. He can't afford anything. Just another guy who thinks he can fit in. The humiliation pressed down on him like a weight he couldn't shake off. He felt his cheeks burn with a mixture of anger and shame. But what hurt more than anything was the realization that they had made him feel small, insignificant. They had made him question his worth, not because of his actions, but because of the color of his skin and the clothes on his back. They hadn't even given him a chance. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Michael made up his mind. He turned on his heel, ignoring the whispers that followed him. Without saying a word, he began to walk toward the exit. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the weight of their judgment was pulling him down with every move he made. He didn't want to leave. He didn't want to be defeated. But the emotional toll of the store's treatment had drained him, and in the end, the decision felt like the only option. As he reached the door, he pushed it open, the bells above the entrance chiming as he stepped outside. The cold air hit him immediately, but it didn't bring the relief he had hoped for. The harsh light of the outside world only highlighted the fact that he had been cast aside, treated as though he wasn't good enough. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a brief moment. The cool air filled his lungs, but it didn't soothe the fire that burned inside him. The pain of the experience weighed heavily on him, but something else was stirring within him as well, a sense of defiance, a desire to prove them wrong. He wasn't going to let their cruel judgment define him. He stood there for a while, just breathing, taking in the moment. The humiliation he felt was real, but it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something more. Michael reflected on what had just happened. He thought about the way the staff had treated him, about the assumptions they had made based on his appearance. They had looked at him and judged him as if his worth could be measured by the brand of his clothes or the thickness of his wallet. They had assumed that because he didn't fit their idea of who deserved to be in a luxury store, he wasn't worthy of respect. They had treated him like an outsider in a place that was supposed to be welcoming to all. But Michael knew better. He knew that respect wasn't earned through wealth or appearances. It was earned through character, through the way you treated others, through the strength of your spirit. And he wasn't going to let their ignorance and arrogance shake his belief in that. As he stood on the sidewalk, he made a vow to himself. He would not be defined by their shallow perceptions. He wouldn't let this moment of humiliation be his story. Instead, he would use it as fuel. The sting of their words would drive him to work harder, to rise higher. He would show them that respect couldn't be bought with money, that it came from within. Michael wasn't going to let their actions dictate his future. He was going to prove them wrong. He wasn't some poor guy trying to fit in. He was someone who would build his own success, not because he needed to impress them, but because he deserved it. He would rise above their judgment, above their mockery, and show the world that he was more than just a man in a store. He was a force to be reckoned with. The more he thought about it, the more his resolve strengthened. He wasn't going to let the humiliation define him. No, he was going to let it motivate him. They had shown him what people like them thought of him. Now it was time for him to show them who he truly was. He wasn't going to beg for respect. He was going to earn it in a way they would never be able to ignore. Michael stood there for a few more minutes, his heart still racing, but now filled with purpose. The cold air, the harsh judgment, the humiliation, it was all going to be his fuel. He didn't need their approval. He didn't need their validation. He would find a way to prove that he was worthy, not because he had money, but because he had something they couldn't take from him, self-respect. And as Michael walked away from the store, he made a silent promise to himself. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The luxury store, which had seemed so cold and judgmental just the day before, was now buzzing with excitement. There was a sense of urgency in the air as the staff hurried around, adjusting displays, straightening racks of designer clothing, and polishing the glass counters. The scent of expensive perfumes lingered, mixing with the sound of soft music playing in the background. Everything had to be perfect for the day's big event. Today was no ordinary day. Today the store was expecting a visit from a key investor, a major player in the luxury goods market who held the power to elevate the store's status and its profits. This investor had been rumored to be extremely selective, a perfectionist who scrutinized every detail of the store's operations. If Mr. Roberts, the manager, and his team impressed this investor, there was a very real chance that they would secure the funding necessary to take the store's brand to the next level. And if Mr. Roberts managed to get on the investor's good side, he might even get the promotion he'd been vying for. The staff was eager, running around with wide smiles, their voices a little higher than usual. They were determined to make today a success. The manager, Mr. Roberts, walked around, his chest puffed out in pride as he surveyed his team. He could already picture himself walking into the investor's office after this visit, telling them how he had made the sale of the century. "Listen up, everyone," Mr. Roberts said, gathering the team together for a quick briefing. "Today is the day. The investor's coming, and we need to make sure everything is flawless. We're going to impress them. This could be my ticket to that promotion I've been waiting for, and I know you all want to make a good impression, too. Let's make sure we show them we have what it takes." The staff nodded enthusiastically, their eyes glinting with excitement. They all understood what was at stake. They were ready to make today perfect. They would greet the investor with smiles, offer impeccable service, and, most importantly, create an atmosphere that oozed exclusivity and luxury. Today, everything had to be flawless. The store was in full swing now. Shiny shoes clicked on the polished marble floor, and polished assistants glided through the aisles with eager smiles. They were ready to play their part in this high-stakes performance. They were confident, they were poised, they were ready for success. But little did they know that their confidence would be shattered in an instant, and their carefully constructed world of wealth and privilege would come crashing down. As the minutes passed, the anticipation for the investor's arrival grew. Mr. Roberts was practically pacing back and forth, checking the time. He was already imagining the moment when he would be able to shake hands with the investor, making them feel like they were in the right place. He couldn't wait to see the impressed look on their face as he talked about how their store was the best in town. It was going to be his big break. But just as he was about to check his watch for the 100th time, the door to the store opened. The bell above the door chimed, and in walked someone who would change everything. Michael. But this was not the same Michael who had walked in the day before. Gone was the hoodie and jeans. Instead, Michael walked in dressed in a sharp business suit, the kind of attire that commanded attention and respect. His shoes gleamed, his tie was perfectly knotted, and his posture was confident. He wasn't alone. At his side were two well-dressed individuals, clearly part of his business team. The atmosphere in the store shifted instantly. The staff froze. Their smiles faltered, and their eyes widened as they saw Michael step through the door. The atmosphere, which had been filled with the excitement of preparing for the investor, now became tense. Whispers rippled through the staff as they exchanged confused looks. Is that him?" one of the associates asked, barely able to believe her own words. Michael walked into the store with the kind of confidence that only came from experience, as if he had been here before and knew exactly how the game was played. The staff stood there, rooted to the spot, unsure of how to react. They were stunned, utterly shocked. They had never expected to see him again, let alone in a suit like that. Mr. Roberts, who had been so confident just moments ago, turned pale. His mind raced as he tried to figure out how to salvage the situation. He had already made assumptions about Michael, the kind of assumptions that had led to the mocking behavior the day before. But now, in front of him, stood a man who looked nothing like the person he had judged so harshly. Michael walked up to the counter, his steps deliberate and calm. He looked around the store, noticing how everything seemed to suddenly quiet down when he entered. The staff members who had once looked down on him were now avoiding his gaze, unsure of how to act. It was clear that the power dynamic had shifted, but Michael wasn't here to make them feel uncomfortable. He was here for a purpose. He approached Mr. Roberts, who stood frozen behind the counter, unsure of how to greet him. The manager swallowed hard, his arrogance of a moment ago now replaced by uncertainty. He stammered as he tried to greet Michael, a forced smile on his face. "Hello, sir. How can I help you today?" Mr. Roberts asked, his voice wavering. Michael's lips curled into a slight smile. He didn't answer immediately, letting the moment hang in the air. The staff watched in complete silence, the tension building in the room. Michael took a moment to glance at them, each one looking more uncomfortable than the last. Finally he spoke, his voice calm and clear. "I'm here to make a purchase," Michael said. "I'm interested in buying this entire store." The words hit the staff like a thunderclap. They had no idea how to react. Mr. Roberts, still trying to process the situation, blinked in disbelief. I'm sorry?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I said," Michael repeated, his voice unwavering, "I'm here to buy this store and everything in it." The shock on Mr. Roberts's face was palpable as he tried to come to terms with the situation. The staff, who had only seen Michael as a poor man yesterday, now realized that they had completely misjudged him. They had underestimated him in the most humiliating way possible. Michael's return had caught them off guard, and now the tables had turned. He wasn't the one who had been humiliated. It was them. The moment of silence in the store stretched longer than anyone expected as the staff stood frozen in disbelief, their eyes darting nervously from one another to Michael. He was the last person they had ever imagined returning, let alone as the owner of the entire store chain. But here he was, dressed impeccably in his sharp business suit, standing before them with an aura of authority and calm confidence. Michael stood tall, his gaze unwavering as he surveyed the shocked faces of the staff. His team, standing behind him, watched with a mix of curiosity and amusement as the store employees began to realize the enormity of what was happening. It was as if the air had thickened and everyone had forgotten how to breathe. Michael, however, remained unbothered by the uncomfortable silence. He had a message to deliver. He began slowly with a tone that was both authoritative and measured, his voice carrying a weight that immediately commanded attention. "Good morning," Michael said, his eyes meeting Mr. Roberts's in particular. "I'm Michael Thomas, and I'm the new owner of this store chain. In fact, I own every single location of this brand now. I bought the entire chain overnight." The words hit the staff like a wave crashing against a rock. The shock was evident on every face as their eyes widened in disbelief. They couldn't fathom what they were hearing. The man they had mocked, dismissed, and underestimated just the day before was now the very person they worked for. Their world, which had felt so secure in its judgment and assumptions, had suddenly shattered. Mr. Roberts' face went pale, his usually composed demeanor completely cracking. He had always prided himself on his ability to control situations, but this was beyond anything he could have anticipated. He tried to mask his shock, putting on a forced smile, but it was clear that his world had just been upended. "Wait, what?" Mr. Roberts stammered, his voice cracking. "You're the owner? The owner of this entire company?" Michael nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact. "Yes, Mr. Roberts, the entire chain." As the realization set in, the staff looked at each other with wide eyes. They had no words. Michael's calmness in the face of their disbelief made the situation even more intense. Some of them started to fidget nervously, while others remained utterly still, trying to process what was happening. Michael gave them a moment to absorb the news. He could see the embarrassment flicker across their faces, particularly in Mr. Roberts, who was now looking at Michael with a mix of awe, confusion, and shame. "I'm sure you're all surprised," Michael continued, his voice steady and even. "But I'm not here to gloat. I'm here to remind you of something important. The way I was treated yesterday, that will never happen again." He let the words sink in as the staff exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with what they were hearing. Michael's expression remained calm, but there was a clear edge of authority in his tone. "You see," he went on, "I came into this store yesterday as a customer, just like anyone else. I was looking to buy a gift for my mother. But instead of being treated with respect, I was mocked. I was dismissed because of my appearance. You assumed I couldn't afford the products in this store simply because I wasn't wearing a designer suit or driving a fancy car. But you couldn't have been more wrong." The staff stood in stunned silence. Michael's words were cutting, but they were not meant to be cruel. He was making a point, one they needed to hear. "I overheard your conversations," Michael continued. "You called me just another guy who thinks he can afford luxury. You laughed at me, thinking that I was some kind of imposter. You followed me around, making me feel uncomfortable and out of place. But let me make something very clear. Your assumptions were wrong, and that kind of behavior will not be tolerated in my stores. Ever." His words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of truth. Michael was not only speaking about what had happened to him personally, but also setting a new tone for the way things would operate from now on. His presence was a force, and it was clear that the staff was finally understanding just how much they had misjudged him. "I don't care how much money you make or what kind of car you drive," Michael said, looking directly at Mr. Roberts. "But I do care about respect. I do care about treating people with dignity, and I expect that from every single person who works for me." The silence in the room was deafening. The staff, who had once walked with an air of superiority, now stood humbled. Their own biases and assumptions had been laid bare, and there was nowhere to hide. Michael paused for a moment before continuing. "You may have thought you were in control here. You may have thought that your judgment of me meant something. But in reality, you have just learned the hard way that money doesn't define a person's worth. Character does. And from now on, that will be the standard by which I judge my employees." At this point, Michael's team, who had been standing in the background watching the exchange, stepped forward. The store employees could see that they were all well-dressed, confident, and serious. They were clearly part of the business world, and it was impossible to deny their influence and success. Michael looked around at the staff once more, his expression softening just a little. "I'm not here to make enemies. I'm here to help change the culture of this store chain. We will create an environment where everyone is treated with respect, no matter who they are or what they look like. That is my commitment to you, and it starts today." He took a step back, signaling to his team to prepare for the next steps. "We'll be meeting with all of you individually to discuss your roles and expectations. But understand this. If you want to work here, you will treat people with respect. You will treat everyone equally. And if you can't do that, then this store will not be the place for you." Michael turned to walk out of the store, his team following closely behind, but before he reached the door, he paused and looked over his shoulder one last time. "Have a good day," he said, his tone still calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. As Michael left the store, the staff was left standing in stunned silence. The weight of what had just happened was heavy, and the realization that they had been wrong, so wrong, was enough to leave them speechless. But for Michael, it was just the beginning. The beginning of a new chapter, one where respect and fairness would reign and where people would be judged by their character, not by their appearance. As Michael and his team walked through the luxury store, the atmosphere was charged with a strange mix of tension and disbelief. The staff, still reeling from the bombshell revelation of Michael's true identity, could barely process what was unfolding before their eyes. It was as though time had slowed, and they were now facing the consequences of their actions, both as individuals and as part of a larger system that had bred judgment, bias, and discrimination. Michael's footsteps were deliberate as he made his way to the front of the store, the eyes of the employees following him with a mixture of fear and uncertainty. Mr. Roberts, who had been standing near the counter trying to regain some semblance of composure, looked up, his eyes meeting Michael's with an almost pleading gaze. It was a gaze that held no words, but Michael didn't need any. He had already made his decision. Without wasting any time, Michael addressed the room. His voice was calm but firm, carrying an undeniable authority that immediately commanded attention. "I think it's time we address the behavior that took place yesterday," Michael began, his gaze briefly scanning the staff before landing on Mr. Roberts. "The behavior that led to my treatment here as though I didn't belong, simply because I didn't meet certain superficial standards. And that behavior was led by none other than you, Mr. Roberts." The silence in the store grew heavy, and the staff shifted uncomfortably. Michael's words, although restrained, carried a sharpness that cut through the tension like a knife. Mr. Roberts opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He knew what was coming, and there was no way to avoid it. "Mr. Roberts," Michael continued, "your actions yesterday were not only unprofessional, they were discriminatory. You judged me based on my appearance and assumed I wasn't worthy of the very products I was looking to purchase. You made assumptions about my financial status, my worth, and my ability to belong in this space. And because of that, you have no place here anymore." The staff, now fully aware of the situation, exchanged nervous glances. Some of them looked down at the floor, feeling a wave of guilt wash over them. Others still couldn't believe what they were hearing. Mr. Roberts, once so confident in his position, stood frozen in shock, his face a mixture of disbelief and humiliation. Michael took a moment to let his words sink in before proceeding. "I'm afraid I have no choice but to let you go, Mr. Roberts. Your behavior is unacceptable, and it does not align with the values I intend to instill in this company." For a brief moment, Mr. Roberts stood still, his face turning red with anger and embarrassment. He looked as though he was about to argue, but he quickly realized it was futile. The weight of Michael's words hung heavy in the air. The humiliation was too much for him to bear. Without a word, Mr. Roberts gathered his things and turned to leave. As he walked past his colleagues, they couldn't meet his gaze, their shame evident in the way they avoided eye contact. Mr. Roberts, defeated, walked out of the store with nothing more than a sense of lost pride. As the door closed behind him, the tension in the room shifted. There was a brief moment of quiet before Michael turned to the remaining staff, who were now waiting for the next chapter in this unfolding drama. He could feel their eyes on him, some filled with curiosity, others with guilt. Michael took a deep breath and addressed them again. "This isn't just about Mr. Roberts. This is about all of you. You all played a part in this. Whether you were laughing behind my back, ignoring me, or following me around like I didn't belong, you all contributed to the toxic culture I encountered here." The staff shifted uncomfortably, some of them looking at each other, their guilt now palpable. Michael's words weren't just a condemnation of Mr. Roberts. They were a reflection of the collective behavior that had allowed such treatment to happen in the first place. "But," Michael continued, his voice softening just slightly, "this isn't the end. It's an opportunity for change." The staff listened intently as Michael outlined the new policies that would shape the future of the store. They were policies that would focus on respect, equality, and fairness for all customers, regardless of their background, appearance, or financial status. Michael made it clear that discrimination in any form would not be tolerated. "From now on," Michael said, "our store will operate with one simple rule. Treat every single person who walks through that door with the same respect, whether they're wearing a designer suit or jeans. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. The way I was treated yesterday, based on assumptions and judgments, will never happen again. This store is a place for luxury, but not just in the products we sell. It's also about the luxury of respect and kindness." The staff stood in silence as Michael continued to speak about the core values he wanted to instill in the company. He emphasized that this was not just about customer service. It was about creating a space where people, regardless of their background, felt welcome, valued, and respected. "But this is not just about the customers," Michael added, his eyes scanning the room. "This is also about how we treat each other. From the moment you clock in, you are part of a team. That means treating your colleagues with respect, working together, and helping each other succeed. That's the culture I want to build here." As Michael spoke, the staff began to shift in their positions. Some nodded in agreement, while others were clearly still processing the magnitude of the changes that were being introduced. But one thing was clear. Michael's vision was being heard, and whether they liked it or not, they were going to be a part of this new era. "I want you all to reflect on what's happened here today," Michael concluded. The world is changing, and so is this company. We have the opportunity to lead by example, to show that power, money, and status should be used to help others, not put them down. The luxury we offer here is not just material. It's the luxury of treating people with kindness, fairness, and respect. Michael paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the staff one last time. So, let's make that our new standard. Let's set the example for the world. And if you're not willing to be part of that change, then this is not the place for you. With that, Michael turned and walked towards the door, his team following closely behind him. The staff, now left to reflect on their actions, stood in silence. For some, this was a wake-up call, a chance to start anew. For others, it was the uncomfortable realization that they had been complicit in a system that had judged others based on nothing but superficial standards. As Michael left the store, his words lingered in the air, a powerful reminder of the importance of respect and humanity in a world that often prioritized material wealth over character. The atmosphere in the luxury store had shifted dramatically. The once tense, judgmental air now felt heavy with anticipation and reflection. Michael had already set the wheels of change in motion, and now, as the day unfolded, he prepared for one final act that would leave an indelible mark on the store and on the people who had so wrongly judged him. He strolled through the aisles confidently, his business suit impeccable, his presence commanding respect. This time, he wasn't just another customer, and this time, he wasn't being judged. He was walking with purpose, reminding the staff that their assumptions and biases had been completely wrong. He had already proven his worth the day before. Now he would demonstrate just how much more he had. Michael made his way to the very section where, the day before, he had been dismissed. It was the same spot where Mr. Roberts had ignored his request for a high-end gift. Michael had come back to buy the gift he had originally wanted for his mother, an elegant necklace. But this time, he wasn't looking for permission. He wasn't seeking validation. He was simply taking control. The staff watched him in silence. Some of them, including the few who had remained, couldn't help but notice the way Michael carried himself now, in stark contrast to how they had treated him before. His confidence wasn't born from wealth or privilege. It was born from dignity and the realization of his own worth. The same worth they had tried to deny him. Michael walked up to the display, selecting the exact necklace he had wanted the day before. He didn't rush, nor did he let the stares from the staff make him uncomfortable. He took his time, admired the piece, and then turned to a sales associate who had been part of the team that had wronged him. The associate, a younger woman named Emily, was clearly nervous. She had been one of the quieter ones during the previous day's incident, but now her face was flushed with shame. "Would you like to purchase this necklace, sir?" Emily asked hesitantly, her voice shaky. Michael nodded and smiled, but there was no trace of anger or bitterness in his expression. "Yes, I would. Please wrap it up for me." As Emily moved to wrap the gift, Michael glanced around the store once more. The transformation in the atmosphere was palpable. The staff were no longer whispering behind his back. They were watching, observing, perhaps even learning. The judgment that had once permeated the store was beginning to fade, replaced by an uneasy realization that they had made a mistake that had cost them more than they could have ever imagined. Just then, a few of the staff approached Michael. They seemed tentative at first, unsure of how to approach him after the events of the previous day. One by one they stood in front of him, each looking at him with a mix of guilt and regret. "Mr. Michael," one of them, a middle-aged woman named Susan, spoke up. I just wanted to apologize for how we treated you yesterday. It was wrong. We shouldn't have judged you based on how you looked or made assumptions about your ability to buy anything here." Michael listened to her words, but he didn't interrupt. He could see the sincerity in her eyes, the way her shoulders were slightly hunched in embarrassment. This wasn't just a simple apology, it was the first step toward redemption, both for her and for the entire store. Another staff member, a young man named Greg, stepped forward. "I'm sorry, too. We were all wrong, and I feel ashamed. I shouldn't have laughed behind your back. I should have known better. No one should ever be treated the way we treated you." Michael nodded in acknowledgement, but he didn't say anything right away. He could feel the sincerity in their words, but he also knew that apologies weren't enough. Words were easy. Actions were what mattered. "I appreciate your apologies," Michael said, his voice calm but firm. "But let me make this clear. What happened here yesterday isn't something I'll forget easily. It's not just about the necklace or the way you treated me. It's about a bigger issue. It's about respect, about understanding that no one, no matter who they are or what they look like, should be judged unfairly." The staff stood quietly, absorbing every word Michael said. His voice wasn't harsh, but there was a quiet strength behind it, one that made them reflect on their actions more deeply than they had ever expected. "I understand that people make mistakes," Michael continued, "but it's what we do after those mistakes that defines us. You have an opportunity here to change, to be better, to treat people with the respect they deserve, regardless of their appearance or status. I'm giving you that chance." The staff nodded, each of them taking a deep breath as if the weight of the moment was sinking in. They had been humbled by Michael's actions, but more importantly, they were beginning to understand the gravity of the lesson he was teaching them. Michael turned back to Emily, who had now wrapped the necklace. She held it out to him, her hands shaking slightly. "I'll take it now," Michael said, his voice kind as he accepted the package. He turned back to the rest of the staff and gave them a small smile. "This store is about to change," he said. "I want you all to reflect on the way you treated me and how you can treat others better from now on. If you can do that, then I'm willing to give you the opportunity to be part of this change. But if you're not willing to change, then maybe it's time to find a place that aligns with your values." Michael's words hung in the air as he walked toward the door. He didn't need to say anything more. He had made his point clear, and the staff now had the choice to take responsibility for their actions and change, or to remain stuck in the old ways of judgment and discrimination. As he stepped outside the store, the cool air hit his face, and for a moment he closed his eyes, taking in a deep breath. He had done what he set out to do. He had proven that people could change, that respect was something that could be earned through actions, not appearances. And he had shown the world that sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is simply by walking away with your head held high. But the most important lesson of all was that true power lay in kindness and forgiveness. And as Michael walked away, he knew that he had made a lasting impact, not just on the staff, but on the culture of the entire store. As Michael stepped out of the luxury store, the heavy doors closing softly behind him, the atmosphere inside seemed to change once again. The echoes of his words lingered in the air, and the staff remained frozen, their expressions a mix of guilt, contemplation, and newfound understanding. Michael had left them with more than just a lesson. He had left them with a chance to be better, to do better. And for the first time, they could no longer hide behind their judgments. The facade of the store, once a symbol of wealth and status, now seemed like a mirror reflecting the real truth of what had been happening inside. As Michael walked away, he heard the soft murmur of voices behind him. The staff were still talking, but this time it was different. They were not gossiping about someone else or mocking someone who didn't fit their idea of perfection. They were talking about the change they had to make within themselves, the change they had been forced to confront. And in that moment, Michael knew he had done something more than just teach a lesson. He had ignited a transformation. "Never judge a book by its cover," Michael had said. Those words echoed in the minds of everyone present, and it wasn't just a cliché anymore. It was a stark reminder of how much they had misjudged him based on nothing more than his appearance. Michael had proven to them that appearance meant nothing. His suit, his style, his demeanor, all of it had been secondary to who he truly was. And now they understood. Back in the store, the staff remained still for a few more moments before slowly dispersing. Susan, Emily, Greg, and the others exchanged uneasy glances. But there was no more whispering, no more judgment, no more ridicule. There was only the quiet realization that they had been wrong, and now they had to make things right. Mr. Roberts, who had been silent for most of the conversation, stood at the back of the store, looking at the floor. His mind raced with thoughts of the previous day, of the harsh words he had spoken, of the arrogant assumptions he had made. He knew he had lost not just his job, but his dignity, and it was all because of his own actions. Michael had shown him that respect could not be bought. It had to be earned, and he had failed to earn it, both as a manager and as a human being. Meanwhile, Michael was walking away from the store, but his mind wasn't on the necklace he had purchased or the victory he had claimed. His thoughts were with the people who had witnessed the events. He hoped that, just as he had been changed by the experience, they too would carry something with them long after they left the store. He didn't need any grand gestures, just the hope that his words and actions would inspire others to treat everyone with the respect they deserved, regardless of their appearance, their background, or their bank account. Over time, the luxury store would be remembered for something far more important than its high-end merchandise or its elegant decor. It would be remembered as the place where change happened, not in the clothes people wore or the products they bought, but in the way people treated one another. Respect and fairness would rule, and no one would be judged based on how they looked. The store had learned that the true measure of wealth was not in the price tags on the shelves, but in the way you treated people. Michael's legacy at the store would last long after he had walked away. And though the staff would never forget the day they had learned the value of respect, Michael would go on to do even greater things. He had proven that, in a world full of assumptions and biases, it was the strength of one person's actions that could change an entire environment. As the store slowly returned to normal, one thing was certain: Michael had left his mark. And the next time someone walked into that store, no matter their appearance, no matter their background, they would be met with respect. That was the lasting impact of his actions. Michael had shown them that judgment was not only unfair, it was wrong, and it would no longer have a place in the store. In the end, Michael didn't need to say anything else. His actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. And as the doors of the luxury store swung open once again, the staff knew that things had changed for good.